All right, everyone, welcome back to Study Hall. Today we're doing a deep dive, and this one's particularly interesting.
Oh, it is. It
Yeah,
is.
I've got an executive order, and it's called Protecting Second Amendment Rights,
Mm.
signed just a few days ago, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's raising a lot of questions, honestly, just from kind of glancing through it.
Yeah.
So thankfully, we've got some sources to help us break it down a little
Hmm.
bit. We've got the text of the order itself right here,
Okay.
and we've got some expert analysis. So hopefully, between the two, we can sort of figure out what this thing actually does,
Sounds good to me.
what it might mean down the road,
Yeah. Yeah.
and why it's causing such a stir.
It's definitely a hot button issue.
No kidding, no kidding. All right, so let's jump right in. Let's start with the actual text of the order.
Okay.
So right off the bat, it directs the Attorney General
Okay.
to do a review
Okay.
of like a whole bunch of stuff
Oh, wow.
related to firearms.
Okay.
So we're talking obviously laws,
Sure.
but it goes way beyond that.
Oh, really?
International agreements, agency guidance,
Hmm.
even reports from the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention.
Interesting.
It's surprisingly broad, the scope of this thing.
It sounds like it, yeah. It's pretty wide-ranging.
Yeah.
And what I find particularly interesting is the time frame that this review is focused on.
Okay, tell me about that.
January 2021
Okay.
to January 2025.
Mm.
Now, that seems awfully specific, doesn't it?
It does, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's not just some, random chunk of time, right?
Exactly, yeah.
That lines up perfectly with the previous presidential administration.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that there's a direct connection,
Sure.
but it definitely raises questions about the motivation behind this whole review, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's definitely, it suggests that the focus here is on the actions taken during that period.
By that particular administration. Yeah. Okay, so we've got that time frame thing.
Yeah.
And then we get to like the next kind of big question mark,
Oh.
which is what happens after this review?
Hmm.
The order doesn't actually like lay that out.
Okay, so what does it say?
It just says, develop a plan
Hmm.
to, quote, protect the Second Amendment rights of all Americans,
Okay.
end quote.
Yeah.
Okay, but what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Like, are we talking new laws?
Mm.
Are we talking overturning existing regulations?
Right.
We're left hanging a little bit here.
You've hit on, I think, one of the key points of ambiguity in this order. It's like saying we're going to take a road trip, but we're not going to tell you where we're going.
Yeah,
There's a lot of potential for this to go in a lot of different directions.
exactly. So we've got this review, maybe politically motivated.
Mm-hmm.
We've got an unclear end goal.
Okay.
All right, so to help us kind of navigate all of this, we've got some analysis that breaks down sort of the potential pros and cons of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump into those. Let's start with the arguments in favor of this.
Okay.
And one that jumps out right away is this idea of like reaffirming Second Amendment rights. Right? So the order, it really emphasizes the right to bear arms as being like, crucial for individual security and liberty.
Okay.
And this, resonates with a lot of people
Sure.
who view the Second Amendment as like fundamental,
Right.
untouchable.
Mm-hmm.
But here's where I get a little stuck.
Okay.
Isn't the Second Amendment already an amendment?
Well, yeah.
It's already part of the Constitution.
Right.
So what does reaffirming even like achieve?
Yeah. It does seem like more of a symbolic gesture, doesn't it?
It seems like sending a homage
Right.
more than enacting any concrete change.
You're right. It's about signaling a particular stance on gun rights. Okay.
And potentially setting the stage for future actions.
So less about immediate action, more about setting a tone.
Right.
Okay, interesting. All right, so another argument in favor is this idea of reducing what they call regulatory burden. And I got to ask, like, what does that actually mean? What does that look like in like real life?
Okay. So let's say you want to buy a gun legally.
Okay.
You've got to go through a lot of hoops right now.
Sure.
Paperwork, background checks,
Yep.
waiting periods.
Uh-huh.
It varies from state to state,
Right.
which just adds to the complexity of it all.
Okay.
This review could streamline that, make it faster, easier
To buy a gun?
to buy a gun.
So less red tape for gun owners.
Yes.
Okay, but I mean, isn't there a flip side to that?
Sure.
Like, couldn't that also make it easier for people who shouldn't have guns
Right.
to get them.
That's a concern for sure, and that brings us to the potential downsides.
Okay, of this order.
All right, let's dive into those then. What are we talking about here?
Well, particularly when it comes to gun safety measures.
Yeah, that's the big one, right? I mean, that's where things get real complex.
Absolutely. Critics worry that rolling back regulations could make gun violence more likely.
Okay.
Easing up on background checks
Mm.
or waiting periods
Yeah.
could make it easier for someone with, say, criminal intent
Right.
or mental health issues
Uh-huh.
to get their hands on a firearm.
Yeah, and it's such a tough balance, right?
Absolutely.
You've got individual rights on one side, you've got public safety on the other.
Right.
And then there's this whole question of which regulations we're even talking about here.
Yeah.
Right? Some are focused on background checks.
Right.
Some on specific types of firearms.
Yeah.
Others on storage, like how you store your guns.
Exactly. It's not just about, more guns or fewer guns.
Yeah.
It's about who can get them, what kinds of guns, and under what circumstances.
And that makes the impact really hard to predict, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It all depends on the specifics of what actually gets changed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we've touched on some of the potential impacts. Okay. So we've talked about how this might affect, individual gun owners.
Mm-hmm.
But this executive order, it's got these ripples that go way beyond that.
Right.
What about law enforcement?
Yeah.
How might this impact their work, like on the ground?
That's a crucial perspective for sure. Actually, law enforcement opinions on this are pretty divided.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. I would have thought they'd be kind of like unified on something like this.
You'd think so, but it's not that straightforward.
Okay.
So some in law enforcement, they welcome this focus on the Second Amendment.
Okay.
They see it as like supporting their right to carry, protect themselves. But then you've got others who are worried that rolling back these regulations could make their jobs harder.
Yeah.
More dangerous even.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you think about it, they're the ones dealing with gun violence every single day.
Right.
So their perspective is like really valuable here.
It really is. And it just highlights how complex this whole issue is. There's no easy answer.
Right.
And even within law enforcement, you've got this diversity of opinions.
Okay, so we've got gun owners, we've got law enforcement. Who else is going to feel the impact of this?
Well, businesses, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially those involved in, selling firearms.
Okay, so like gun manufacturers?
Yeah, gun manufacturers, retailers, they might see this as a good thing.
Okay.
Less regulation, more freedom to design, to sell new products, potentially higher sales profits.
Right. But couldn't that also create like chaos in a way? What if these regulations change drastically?
Oh.
I mean, wouldn't those companies have to like scramble to adapt?
Oh, absolutely.
And that could lead to like disruptions in the market?
Yeah, there's definitely a potential for instability there, uncertainty. If this review leads to big shifts in the rules of the game, businesses would have to like change how they do things, redesign products, maybe even face lawsuits. It could be a real wild ride for them.
And it's not just limited to like the gun companies themselves, right?
Yeah.
Think about the ripple effects.
Right.
Insurance companies.
Yeah.
They might have to adjust their policies. Security firms, they might see more demand.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even healthcare providers. They could be impacted by like shifts in gun violence rates.
It's a web, isn't it?
Yeah.
All these interconnected consequences.
Yeah, and it just shows like how important it is to think about the bigger picture here.
Right.
The economic impacts, the social impacts.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got law enforcement, we've got businesses, but at the end of the day, like this is all about people, right? Like what does this executive order actually mean for the average person?
That's the big question. And the tough part is there's no easy answer.
Right.
It all comes down to like how this review actually plays out. What specific changes are made.
Yeah.
We're kind of stuck in this wait and see mode right now.
Wait and see. It feels like we've been saying that a lot today.
Yeah, it's true. It's the reality though. We can speculate.
Yeah.
But until things actually happen, it's hard to say for sure.
Okay, fair enough. But indulge me for a second. Let's speculate a bit. Like what are some scenarios that could play out for everyday folks?
Okay. Well, one possibility is that some people might feel more empowered to exercise their Second Amendment rights. And that could lead to like an increase in gun ownership. Driven by this idea that the government's like taking a step back from gun control,
Right.
a more hands-off approach.
And on the flip side, I mean, some people might feel less safe.
Oh, yeah.
Especially like if they live in areas with a lot of gun violence. Or if they've been personally affected by it.
Right. The psychological impact here, that could be really significant.
Yeah.
And it will probably vary a lot,
Right.
based on individual experiences, beliefs, their sense of safety.
It seems like this whole conversation, it just keeps coming back to this tension
Yeah.
between like individual rights and public safety.
Right.
It's like this constant tug of war.
It is. And this executive order, it's definitely like reignited that debate.
Oh, speaking of reignited,
Yeah.
have you seen what people are saying on social media about this?
Oh, it's been impossible to miss.
I know, Ro.
People are fired up. This has really tapped into like some deep-seated beliefs.
Yeah.
And anxieties about guns in America. And, like with any issue that's this emotionally charged, it's so important to approach these conversations with respect.
Yeah.
A willingness to listen.
Yeah.
Even when we disagree.
Right. It's so easy to like get caught up in the heat of the moment.
Oh, yeah.
But we need to find ways to talk about this. Gun control in a way that's productive, informed.
Absolutely. And part of that is recognizing that there are all these different perspectives out there.
Right.
What might feel like a victory for one person could feel like a defeat for someone else.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so crucial to look at all sides of the issue. Listen to different voices, have these thoughtful dialogues even when it's hard.
It's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between individual rights and the well-being of everyone.
So we've explored all these potential impacts. Gun owners, law enforcement, businesses, everyday people. But this executive order, it's just one piece of a much bigger picture, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The gun control debate in the U.S., it's got this long, complex history.
Yeah.
And this is just like one chapter.
So where does the story go from here? What happens next?
Yeah.
Well, that's something we'll be digging into in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at some potential scenarios, what this might mean for the future of gun control in America.
Welcome back to Study Hall, everybody. We've spent the last couple segments really picking apart this executive order.
Yeah.
Looking at, all the different ways it might play out. But now I want to kind of shift gears a bit.
Okay.
I want to look ahead. What might the long-term consequences of this be?
Right.
What does it tell us about the future of this whole gun control debate?
Oh, those are the big questions.
Right, the ones that, keep you up at night.
Yeah. And truthfully, there's no, like, crystal ball here.
No easy answers. But we can at least, try to game out some scenarios. Right.
So let's do that. Let's imagine for a second that this review leads to, significant deregulation. What would that actually look like?
Well, we might see changes to, the federal background check requirements.
Okay.
Maybe they make them less strict.
Okay.
More exceptions. We could also see them loosen the rules around certain types of firearms.
Okay, give me an example.
Ones with, high-capacity magazines.
Okay.
Or certain kinds of modifications.
Okay, so a real shift towards, easier access to guns.
Yeah.
But what would that actually mean, in terms of consequences?
Right.
Would we see, this spike in gun violence? Or would it be the opposite, Yeah. Would it empower, law-abiding citizens to better protect themselves?
Well, that's the big question, right?
Yeah.
The billion-dollar question, maybe, given all the potential costs we're talking about. And the research on this link between gun ownership and crime, it's really messy.
Okay.
Often inconclusive.
So it's not as simple as saying, more guns equals more crime.
Right, exactly.
Or the other way around.
It's not that simple. There's so many other things going on.
Okay.
Social and economic conditions, mental health, even just cultural attitudes towards violence.
Right.
It's really hard to isolate the impact of gun ownership by itself.
And of course, this whole issue is just so politically charged.
Oh, absolutely.
It's hard to even have a rational conversation about it.
Yeah, I can feel that way. It's often driven by ideology more than evidence.
Yeah.
Which makes, finding any common ground
right.
really, really tough.
Okay, so that's one scenario, right? move towards deregulation. But what about the flip side? What if this review, what if it doesn't lead to big changes?
Okay.
What if it actually results in more regulation?
Now, that would be a twist. It's not impossible, though.
Right.
Remember, the order itself, it's pretty vague on what should actually happen.
Yeah.
After this review, just says, protect Second Amendment rights.
Right. And that could mean anything.
Exactly.
Couldn't this review, like, uncover problems with the current regulations?
Sure. Yeah.
And then lead to, like, calls for strengthening them?
Absolutely. They could find loopholes, areas where existing laws just aren't working.
Yeah.
And that could lead to recommendations for, tighter controls.
So this whole thing could backfire on the people who are, like, hoping for less regulation.
Yeah.
It could actually end up giving more ammunition
Right.
to the gun control folks.
It's possible. And it just shows how unpredictable these executive orders can be.
Right.
Yeah. They often have these unintended consequences.
Okay, so we've got these two big scenarios. More regulation, less regulation.
Right.
But no matter which way it goes.
Yeah.
This executive order, it's definitely, like, stirred up the pot.
Oh, yeah. No doubt about it.
It's pushed this whole gun control debate right back into the spotlight.
Front and center.
Reignited all these passions.
On both sides.
And this isn't just some, like, abstract policy debate, right?
No.
This is about real people, real families,
Right.
real communities being impacted by this stuff.
Absolutely. The stakes, they're incredibly high.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to go beyond just the rhetoric.
Right. Yeah.
Have a genuine, nuanced conversation.
We need to listen to each other. Consider all these different viewpoints.
Right.
And be willing to find some middle ground.
Even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard. Because we can't just keep, like, talking past each other on this.
Right. We need to find solutions that work for everyone.
Protect individual rights and public safety.
It's a tough balance.
Yeah.
But it's one we have to strive for.
Well, folks, that's about all the time we have for today. We covered a lot of ground, but I think the big takeaway is that this conversation, it's far from over. This executive order, it's just one step on a really long road.
And it's a road we got to travel together.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and until next time, keep those minds curious and engaged.